Policemen and firemen had built a human tunnel from the lobby through the underground mall of the World Trade Center all the way out to World Trade Center 7. Still today, if I close my eyes, I can see their faces and I can hear their New York accent saying, "You're under terrorist attack. You need to move quickly so that other people can get out of the building behind you." It was at that time that the voice inside of my head said, "Lightning never strikes twice." Genius. We emerged from World Trade Center 7 to street level. It was a beautiful September day, blue skies. The sun actually hurt my eyes as we came up on the street. I paused to send an email from my pager to my wife, Kim. It simply said, "I'm okay, Kyle." I then looked over my shoulder and I saw that both towers were on fire. I was dumbstruck at the sight and just stood there trying to reconcile what must have happened. I could see people above the fire line at the windows motioning for help. I will tell you that at this time, I choose not to talk about what I saw and heard in those next moments, just in honor of those that didn't make it out. Kevin and I decided to go to his hotel, which was only a few blocks from the World Trade Center complex. Several people from my team were staying there. They were on that short-term project that I mentioned. We'd made it about a block and a half when I heard a loud rumble. Kevin and I both turned at the same time, and we saw that the South Tower was collapsing. People started screaming, and just like them, we started running. We got separated at that time. I was enveloped in darkness of a huge black cloud with debris falling everywhere around me. I fell to my knees at the base of a brick wall. Debris poured down on me and around me for what seemed like an eternity. I pulled my tie up over my nose and my mouth so that I could breathe and filter the oxygen through the debris. At that time, I really thought I was going to die from a lack of oxygen. A man cried out, "I can't see." I tried to open my eyes, but it was pitch black and my eyes burned. A woman cried out, "I can't breathe, somebody help me." Then a man with what I believe was an Irish accent cried out, "Where's the light?" That made me think of my favorite song. It's entitled "In the Light." It's based on 1 John 5 that says simply, "God is light. In him there is no darkness at all." The words to that song race through my mind. It goes like this: "I keep trying to find a life on my own apart from you. I'm the king of excuses. I've got one for every selfish thing I do. What's going on inside of me? I despise my own behavior. This only serves to confirm my suspicion that I am still a man in need of a Savior." With my eyes closed, my mind's eye could see my wife singing in our church choir. I could see my children sitting on the couch in front of the Christmas tree with the fire burning, me reading a Christmas carol. And I could see my parents laughing at my kids as they skimboarded on the beach on our family vacations. Eventually, the sunlight began to pierce the darkness. I was able to breathe a little bit easier, and I got up and made my way away from the World Trade Center. Now completely separated from my team and not really sure whether the tower fell because of a separate attack or the first attack, I decided to head to Chinatown. My line of logic was simple. There was nothing in Chinatown that would interest the terrorists. On my way there, I stopped in a convenience store to get some water. My eyes were burning, my mouth was on fire, I had dirt and soot all over me. I wasn't sure why, but the other patrons in the convenience store let me cut in front of them in line. When I made it to the cashier, he simply looked at me and said, "No charge." I wasn't in a mood to argue. I realized I was covered in dirt and figured he just wanted me to get out. But my eyes burned, so I headed outside, began to cleanse my eyes, my nose, and my mouth, and drank what little water was left. I made it to Chinatown. There was a family of immigrants that stood in front of their home that were looking straight over top of my shoulder as I approached them on the sidewalk. They were looking at the North Tower that was still burning behind me. The grandmother, who evidently could speak no English, began yelling and pushing on her son. He walked out to the gate that met me on the sidewalk, and he said, You look like you need some help. Are you okay?" I said, "I'm fine, but I could use some water." Soon after that, his wife and his children returned with bowls of water and cloths. After fussing with a woman who could not speak English to me, the grandmother, I finally relented and she began to cleanse my face with the cloths. After a few wipes of my head, she dipped the cloth back in the bowl and I saw it fill with blood, and I knew at that time why I had received the complimentary water and the special attention of this family. A few moments later, I heard the same dull roar that I'd heard before. This time the North Tower was collapsing. It's actually one of the most memorable visions that I have of the day, as I watched the building that I worked in crash straight to the ground with the communications needle still pointing up all the way to the ground. At that time, I noticed that the Chinese family was crying with me, and I thought to myself that millions of people around the world were probably crying at the same time. I thanked the family, but I took a deep breath and I sent a page to my good friend and coworker named Damien, who also had a pager. To my relief, within a few moments, he responded, and we made plans to meet in Midtown. On the way to meet him, by chance, I started talking to another guy on the sidewalk that was walking in the same direction I was. His name was Steve Thumb. Steve was a former West Virginia University football player that was now a stockbroker on Wall Street. It just so happened that Steve lived 2 blocks from where I lived, outside of Princeton, New Jersey. We exchanged phone numbers and the names of our wives, and we promised each other that whoever got through to their wife first would have them contact the other's wife to let them know that after both towers fell, we were both okay. Steve beat me to the phone and was able to call my wife and let her know that as far as his wife knew, I was okay. Damien and I met in Midtown as planned. We bought some new clothes from a street vendor and went to a friend's apartment there in Midtown. The phone in the apartment at the time was dead. After I showered, changed into my fake Levi's that I paid way too much for, we went to get something to eat. We ate a hamburger and we watched CNN on the bar's TV. They had plenty of coverage on the attacks from around the world. During that time, I experienced every emotion possible. I became very emotional and angry as I watched the scenes of persons from Arab countries as they celebrated the attacks. Damien, who has a terrific sense of humor, stood up and said, "There's no reason to stay at a bar. If Kyle isn't going to drink alcohol today, we're never going to get him to drink alcohol." We went back to the apartment where the phones were now operational. I tried to call my wife, but I couldn't get through, so I called my parents. My mom answered the phone. I said, "Hi, Mom, it's Kyle." She began crying and handed the phone to my dad. Dad took the information of where I was, called Kim and let her know where she could reach me. At 3:30 that afternoon, I finally got to speak to my wife and let her know that I was okay. As she was talking to me, I could hear laughing and cheering behind her. She let me know that about 25 people were at the house. They were members of a study group from our church that Kim and I led. Most of them had been there since early that morning to be with her and the boys throughout the ordeal. It must have been a good time because my youngest son, who was in kindergarten at the time, thought they were having a party. Kim cried and talked so fast about everything that had happened that day that I simply sat and listened. As I hung up the phone, it occurred to me that for my mom and dad, my brother and my wife, the day was actually harder than it was for me. On the 6 o'clock news, they announced that the New Jersey Transit, the train that I rode to and from work, was running out of Grand Central Station. So Damien, who was also from New Jersey, walked with me to Grand Central and we caught a train back home. I got home after dark, a little bit after 8:30. After reuniting with the family, I sat down at the dinner table, and then the phone rang just a little bit before 9. Kim answered the phone. She came to the dinner table with a few tears in her eyes. I said, "Who was that?" She said, "Oh, it's just some people from the church, just checking to make sure you're okay." When I asked her why she was crying about that, she wouldn't respond. But eventually she exploded in tears as she said that Todd Beamer had died on the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania, Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Todd and Lisa Beamer were members of our church. They were very active in the youth program and taught our boys on Sundays. You probably best know Todd as the man who said, "Let's roll," to the other 3 men on the plane that rushed the terrorists that caused them to crash in Pennsylvania instead of crashing into the Pentagon as they planned. The phone rang again at 9:30, and this time I answered the phone. It was one of the executives from the Port Authority. After asking if I was okay and if I felt up to doing some work, she said she'd like for me to do 2 things. First, get her a list by 9:30 the next morning of all the employees, their addresses and phone numbers. She said they needed this to start doing a head count to see who had made it out and who had not. Secondly, she asked that we reproduce the payroll checks that were due on Friday, September the 14th. I paused, gulped, and I said, "Peggy, you do realize that we don't have any computers. We don't have any printers. We don't have any stock to print the checks on." She said, "Kyle, I know, but I know that you're the one that can make this happen. I know I'm asking for the impossible, but right now, we need a miracle." I told her I'd already tried to access the computer system from home and the network was simply non-responsive. I told her I would need physical access to our computer center on Staten Island and I needed to invoke our emergency backup and recovery plan. She approved all of that, which, as you would imagine, required funding. So I contacted Damien and Kevin and asked for their help over the next couple of days. This Kevin was actually a different Kevin than the one that went down the stairs with me. The one that went down the stairs with me was on the short-term project. On Thursday the 13th, I learned that he and all the others from out of town were able to get out of the building. All of my team was out, and they had rented cars and driven home. For those of you that remember, the air traffic control was locked down for several days after 9/11. Kim and I tucked the boys in for the night. I took another shower. It actually took me a couple of weeks to stop feeling like I had dirt and glass in my skin. I didn't sleep that night, but I watched Kim sleep, and I thought about the events of the day, and I contemplated what I was going to have to do in the next few days. I'll be honest and tell you the next few days are blurry in my memory. Between not sleeping, working with computers that were, for lack of a better word, broken, and the emotion of everything going on around us in our country, it may be best that I don't remember it all. What I do remember is the facility we were working in had to be evacuated 2 times, once because of a bomb threat and once because of an anthrax scare. We were delayed each time that we crossed the bridge between New Jersey and Staten Island. They took extra precautions to check each car for bombs because of the heightened security awareness. And then Thursday morning, as I left for work, I saw my neighbor go to his mailbox with a hazmat suit on to get his mail. I talked to Kim later that afternoon, and she confirmed that our post office in our hometown was a confirmed site of the anthrax attack that happened right after 9/11. We were able to generate the list of names and phone numbers and addresses in the morning like Peggy had asked me to, but printing the checks proved to be much harder. We had to drive to Pennsylvania to get the new printers. We had to beg, borrow, and steal from a local hospital to use some of their check stock to print it on. And we had to fight with the system to restore it, recover it, bring it back up, and then trick it into believing that we had never printed the checks that we'd printed on Monday the 10th. But finally, late on Thursday, September the 13th, the Port Authority police showed up, escorted by the National Guard. They took all the checks back to New Jersey, where they'd be stuffed and sent out the next day. As we waited to cross the bridge back into New Jersey, an F-14 jet flew over top of us towards the World Trade Center site. We watched and saw that the fires were still burning and smoke was bellowing out of the site. I commented that I never thought I'd be so happy to enter the state of New Jersey. On Friday, with the cooperation of FedEx, meaning they did it for free, all 10,000 Port Authority checks were delivered to the employees at their homes. Over 300 of those employees didn't make it back home. I returned home around 2:30 p.m. and went to bed. I was asked to share with you my 9/11 experience tonight. If I'm honest with you, I will tell you that I still experience it today. Sometimes it's a smell, a reference in a book, or being caught by surprise as I watch an old movie and see the towers in the background. Sometimes it's a tear in my family members' eyes as they think about what that day was like. Even last week, it was a revelation from one of my family members about the emotions that they're still feeling to this day. Or maybe it's a former team member calling me up after years of not talking to tell me that they've actually been in counseling since that day and just wanted to talk through that event and everything that happened. Likewise, I will tell you that I reflect on 9/11 pretty much every day. I had to look up the definition of reflect and remember to make sure I knew the difference. Remembering is simply to have an event come to mind, and reflecting is to think about it seriously or to contemplate upon an event. I'll leave it to the journalists and the politicians and the statesmen to tell us about how it's changed our country and how it's changed our world and how it should change our culture. I only feel qualified to reflect on what it's meant to me. As I share this, I don't pretend to speak for people that lost their loved ones. I don't know what they've gone through. I also don't pretend to understand the emotions that they go through, or for that matter, the emotions of my own family. I can tell you that I don't take myself as seriously as I did 10 years ago. For those that know me today, they'll find that hard to believe, but it's true. Before 9/11, I considered myself a self-made man. Since then, it's become clear to me that I have the greatest parents in the world. They made me who I am. I realized that I was influenced by incredible people like teachers, coaches, family friends, and ministers that influenced who I am today. I've read a lot recently about how 9/11 has made our nation more respectful of the military and first responders such as police and fire and emergency personnel. I don't have that issue. My parents raised me to respect the people in these professions for all the right reasons. Some of my best memories of growing up here in Morehead center around some of the MSU policemen that reported into my dad. I try to spend much more time today than I did before, focusing about what's right about our world instead of what's wrong with our world. September 11th definitely showed us the worst that man can do. But it also showed us how good man can be. We watched people sacrifice themselves for others. We watched people comfort those had lost loved ones. And we saw a compassion that many questioned whether America really even possessed or not. I've traveled the world, I've lived abroad. I will tell you that America is still a very special place. I, like many others, look at our economy, the wars, the state of U.S. politics, and I worry about where we're headed. But then I stop and I thank God to be an American, as I think about the blessings and opportunities that we all have. I remind myself that America is still the best country to grow up in. I'm going to embarrass